And if you have, as our custom is, something to say, please don't hesitate. Remember, if I share the screen, I won't see you, but just unmute and shout out. So this Fleischer, on the topic of the religious secular divide, its staging is meant to be provocative. Bertha and Aryeh Fleischer, Holocaust survivors, are the owners of a butcher shop in a secular Israeli neighborhood. They are confronted by members of a Haredi, ultra-Orthodox community that is moving in to the neighborhood, and they are actually encouraging the secular residents to leave. And some do, in fact, leave the neighborhood when the Haredim start throwing stones at them when they're watching TV on Shabbat. At first, the Fleischers aren't disturbed. They see it as a possible economic opportunity with new people coming into the neighborhood. And they choose, in fact, to invest in beautifying their shop. But no one enters. The Haredim have boycotted. They are finally told by a Haredi lawyer whose name is Hund, Yiddish for dog, that they need to purchase a certificate for kashrut. And of course, the certificate goes for an exorbitant price. They buy it, and it puts them, ad kedei kach, it puts them in debt. However, they secretly go on selling non-kosher food, meat, even though they have been certified. Secretly. They even attempt to give an appearance of becoming more observant. He wears a kippah and she has her head covered. They still don't attract any buyers, and the shop remains empty. And this becomes a problem for them because they are no longer able to keep their 30-year-old son, Shloimele, in an institution because he is mentally disabled. Moving back, he eventually rapes one of the Haredi young women. And then ultimately, his parents die accidentally by a fire that he starts in their home. I could have stopped in the middle and said, I know this sounds like a melodrama, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted you to hear it in its entirety. What were you feeling as you were watching the script? Just gut feeling. Unmute yourself. Yeah.
I was getting angrier and angrier.
Me too. Disgust.
No, I was thinking that things are going to go bad here. Something terrible is going to happen before you told me about the fire.
Okay. Anybody else? Why do you, Brenda?
I would say, although neither side was blameless the way you told the story.
Go ahead.
Certainly, it makes Haredi, you sort of wonder what their concept of the religious principles are when they're doing things that are so contrary to what I would say religious belief is.
Good. Anybody else?
Well, I wasn't surprised because I think from what I know about Haredi, unless you're a part of the group to start with, they're not going to have anything to do with you.
Okay, good to see you, Margot, and hear from you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I've got
Gloria,
something. What gives these Haredi the legal right to go into a neighborhood and throw everybody else out so they could be there and live by their own rules?
we need you to be in the elections in 3 weeks, Gloria. Okay. They didn't just throw them out. They were strongly suggesting, what is the purpose though? And I think Brenda hit on this, of putting the character Shlomi and being mentally challenged, of putting him in that story. Anybody? I have a sense that it is.
You would hope that there would be, you'd hope that there would be some kind of rahmanas or some kind of understanding on the part of the neighborhood when they see somebody with this kind of a problem. Because I imagine there are a great many people in the community who also have similar problems.
Okay, okay. There is a sense that the playwright was certainly painting an ugly picture of the Haredim and how they invaded this new community and the fact that they threw the stones. But Brenda hit on it when she said that you have these secular who are pretending. And they even get to the point that they have their certificate, but they're still trying to get away as if they have no sensitivity to the needs of the Haredim. Now, I begin with this because I'd like to state that our thinker today and for the next 3 weeks, Micha Goodman, if reviewing, somebody please mute. If reviewing this play would say the following: it is an unfair portrayal if one is claiming that all Haredim, all ultra-Orthodox are intolerant, and if you're claiming that all secular are anti-tradition. Micha Goodman accepts the fact, you can't otherwise, that there is a divide and that there are some that are intolerant and there are some that resent tradition, but it is not all of them. And he thinks that we have to begin that way. Now that I've set the stage, who is Micha Goodman? He is a very, very attractive young thinker. He's an author of several bestsellers. He is Shomer Mitzvot. He's a fellow at the Hartman Institute. He travels the world. He speaks to people in the Knesset, in the president's home, in the prime minister's home. He's a leading voice on Judaism, Zionism, the Tanakh, and challenges and opportunities facing Israel and contemporary Jewry. He is as well a director and teacher at a marvelous institute called Beit Prat, which is a pluralistic Beit Midrash, house of study for young adults, nurturing connections between Israelis and diaspora Jews of very different backgrounds. Micha's passion is the subject of this book. He is accompanying those who are on a search for Jewish identity, Jewish identity, the wandering Jew. And Micha deeply feels that members of both the Haredi, ultra-Orthodox, and the Chiloni, secular, are on this search. Let's begin to listen to his take on each side of the rift. A rift that without a doubt has been exacerbated in these months, year of Corona, and since Monday. Anybody know why I say since Monday?
The conversion decision.
Yes. So without wanting to get into the details of that, but you should read up about it, on Monday, the Supreme Court in this country voted to make reform and conservative conversions that take place in Israel valid for civil rights and for citizenship. I can't tell you the horrific press that has been getting. I joked before, but we know we are due to have elections again in a few weeks. And one of the advertisements already, you see a dog on the screen with tefillin and a talit. And this is a group that is comparing Jews that will be converted, they will be Jews, to dogs. Unheard of. As far as Corona, it has been two-sided. But you see pictures of masses of Haredim attending funerals, but you also see masses of seculars, including, I told you I would report on Purim in Tel Aviv and here in Machane Yehuda, of partying en masse. Everyone understands everybody has had it. And saying, how dare you defile my individual rights? Well, not when it comes to somebody else's health, forgetting about yours. So we are in an environment, as I say, of feeling this divide, particularly now. I want to reiterate what I said earlier, though. Micha rejects stereotypical images. We have an image before us that the Haredim are a homogeneous society. Micha claims that the Haredim are the most diverse community within Israeli society. I trust that that sounds very strange. However, he says that it is evenly divided between those Haredim who are looking to enter mainstream Jewish living and those who do want to remain isolationists. And we've been hearing this. Programs at different universities that have Haredim looking to finally take courses and courses that will lead to working in the market. And just today, a program in the Army for Haredi girls to become part of the fight against cyber terrorism. And I, sitting on a bus a while ago, on a Friday between Yerushalayim and Tel Aviv, and a Haredi soldier sitting across from me, and he's on the phone, and I can hear what he's saying. The person that he's talking to has obviously asked him, so you're on a pass, you're going home for Shabbos? No. I hear him say, I can't go home. They won't take me. But we know that we have ultra-Orthodox Haredi in the army. And we know that at places like Micha's Beit Prat, that the two groups are learning together. So Micha describes what he calls an optical illusion. When we see angry Haredim, whether it's on the TV screen or we're on the street, and we see masses, and we see them protesting, we like to think that they are protesting modern Israel, because we know that that's their philosophy. But no, he says, and this is significant, they are protesting against the modernization of parts of Haredi Israel, the people that I've just described. Now, what's the optical illusion? Who is louder? Is it those who want to become more modern, or those reacting to the people who want to become more modern? It is the reactors. The reactors are the ones that are very, very loud. And so we think they are the real thing because they're in our face. It makes sense. And on the other side, and everything I'm saying today, we will come back to. And on the other side, Micha finds profound joy in another optic, but not an illusion, in observing a new generation of secular Israelis, significant numbers, returning to Jewish tradition. The form that that takes, we'll come back to at another session. But what I will say, listen carefully, it's not secular Israelis becoming religious. It's Israelis trying to become more Jewish. Let's first hear Micha's understanding of secular Israel and its beginnings. And where is that beginning? In the European exile, late 18th, beginning 19th century, with the birth of our Chalutzim, our Zionist pioneers. The founding fathers of Israel had a dream. What was that dream, by the way? Anybody? What would you say was the founding fathers' dream in creating Israel?
A home for Jews.
A home for Jews.
Unity of all Jews.
Unity of all Jews. Okay. Anybody else?
They wanted to turn the land back into a land of milk and honey.
Fair?
Safe haven for all Jews.
Safe haven for all Jews. Good. Anybody else?
Not a religious state. Was not to be a religious state.
Okay.
Not a
They
theocracy.
wanted to escape from persecution.
They wanted to escape from persecution.
And anti-Semitism.
Okay, Rita, what you just added is a good follow-up to what Bev just said, because she just said persecution, and I was going to ask persecution from whom? And it's as if, Rita, you understood that she wasn't necessarily saying persecution from anti-Semites. Anybody know where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
Brenda?
They also wanted a change in the Judaism as they saw it practiced where they were living. They wanted to modernize.
Okay.
Don't
Good.
forget.
They wanted to escape the appearance of Jews held by anti-Semites of being the strommels and the tzitzis hanging and all of that. They wanted to prove to the world that Jews had the capacity, ability, and desire to become with it, so to speak. The freedom to come, to escape that characterization.
But you know, Bracha, we have to think about those times when it was the rising of socialism in Europe, and we're looking at the early kibbutzim. We're quite socialist.
Right.
You know, we have to look at the broader picture here.
Well, what do you mean exactly? Why say that in response to?
Because
Can you
it was
explain?
not, there would be a place for the Haredi, those who were studying in yeshiva, and they were much smaller in numbers in those days. And the early aliyot in the late 1800s and that was a very, yes, somebody just said the word, they wanted a modern, and they were also coming forth with the socialist ideas that was especially in Eastern Europe. And they wanted to bring those ideals, and that's what the kibbutzim, the secular kibbutzim, were based on.
Yeah. Okay. Everything, let's put that together. They were looking to build a free country, secular in character, and liberated from Gentile rulers and the chains of the past. Now, for them to be against foreign Gentiles interfering with their lives, that's easily understandable. But why were they calling for what Micha calls a great revolt against Judaism? They equated the submissive and the cowardly Jew with Judaism. I'm going to repeat that. They equated the submissive and cowardly Jew with Judaism. Here, I often get upset with Haredim if they're the reason that some people are turned off to Judaism because of their distortion of it. We'll get to that as well. So these pioneers, founders, hated a two-part image of submissiveness to two oppressive authorities, the Gentiles and what he calls rabbis frozen in time. And when we talk about the Haredim more and their beginnings, we'll get to that as well. These pioneers were against Jewish powerlessness. Now, it wasn't Judaism per se that repulsed, and I'm using a very strong word, repulsed them, but it was robot-like religious Jews. Halakha, they felt, Jewish law, they believed, trained Jews to be simply obedient. And you're right, we're talking about a time in modernization of autonomy, individualism. Zionism purported to liberate Jews, create a new generation of Jews freed from authority and fear of sinning, because the rabbis made them feel that guilt. And they were looking for self-actualization. Now I'm going to share the screen. Micha writes, exile had warped the Jewish character. If the diaspora were ended and Jews reunited in their homeland, they believed the Jewish character would heal. If the Jews relocated to the land of Israel, if they started exercising their muscles by working the land, if they bore arms and cast aside their religious observance, they would be cured of the psychological maladies they had accumulated in exile. Zionism was chiefly a therapeutic project. More than establishing a new state, its objective was to forge a new Jew. In 1903, the Jewish community leadership in Odessa sent a young poet, Chaim Nachman Bialik, to Kishinev to investigate the massacre of the town's Jews and was asked to write a detailed report. Bialik instead wrote this poem, just selections. And there are different versions. This is the initial version, called On the Slaughter. His decrying the atrocity was nothing new. Other people had written about other pogroms. Let's examine it and see what perhaps was new in what Bialik wrote. Where 7 heathens flung a woman down, the daughter in the presence of her mother, the mother in the presence of her daughter, before slaughter, during slaughter, and after slaughter. Note also, do not fail to note, in that dark corner and behind that cask, crouched husbands, bridegrooms, brothers, peering from the cracks, crushed in their shame. They saw it all. They did not stir nor move. They did not pluck their eyes out. They beat not their brains against the wall. Perhaps, just perhaps, each watcher had it in his heart to pray, a miracle, O Lord, and spare my skin this day. What is it that Bialik is saying here? And why do I say that what he was saying was different from previous people describing pogroms and such atrocities?
Nobody stood up and fought against it.
Who's the nobody that he's condemning?
The men who are hiding in the cracks, the husbands, the brothers, nobody is lifting a hand to help the women. And the women are also, trapped by the heathens who have attacked. But the Jewish people are not defending themselves.
Exactly. Instead of exalting the victims, which usually is the tone in other writers' creations, Bialik is blaming the males here. The women, they were caught, they were trapped. But he's describing these men, whatever age, as weak, degraded. And he's condemning that. And what's the significance of the two last lines? Perhaps each watcher had it in his heart to pray, a miracle, O Lord, and spare my skin this day. What is he saying there?
That the men weren't concerned about saving the women, they were concerned about saving themselves.
No, it's a very scathing attack against the passive use of religion and lack of action.
Well, I think we can combine. I believe I'm hearing from Shelley and Gladys. I think that it does almost sound in that last line as if the men are saying, okay, the women, we can't help, but please, God, take care of us. There could be a tone of that. And that perhaps is even worse than what Gladys suggested. They're praying.
Not fighting.
And what Bialik, is suggesting, first of all, shouldn't they be angry with the God who has let this happen? There's a point in the Torah that God gets angry with Moshe and says, what are you doing here? Standing and praying. Why aren't you going and doing something? So Bialik is one of the secular chalutzim, and we'll hear more about him, who adds his voice to those pioneers who were rejecting this world and these people who seem to represent that world. And they wanted to break away, for sure. Now it's fascinating. The people who want to break away bring us to the land that Moshe was meant to bring us to live the Jewish life. Very complicated, and we will hear more about that. Now, before we go on to our last part today, I'd like you to voice, either based on what we've said already today or on other thoughts that you have, what would you say is the source of this divide? It's important for me that I feel that you have a sense or where your thoughts are out as we proceed. And I'm looking for you to describe even character traits that each side might have.
You know, Bracha, I'm thinking about the Haredim who didn't want to, and still many don't want to speak Hebrew because they think it should only be in the prayers. They don't speak it on a daily basis. They speak Yiddish instead. You hear it on the streets. Whereas this new group that was coming in these early Aliyot, the first thing they were doing was taking Hebrew names and building up. And you have Eliezer ben Yehuda and that whole movement towards the Hebrew language, which is absolutely vital to the birth of this nation. Ladati.
Bracha, it's Marilyn Siegel. As far as these men watching the women, I do believe that the young Zionists had it in their hearts and minds that they were no longer going to be powerless. They might believe in God, but God helps those who help themselves. And I really feel that the young Zionists wanted to be totally prepared. To live in this world, you had to know how to be defensive and offensive. And that was I think that was one of their prime goals. Never again were we going to watch. And if we had to watch, we'll go down fighting. We're not going to hide. No more hiding. And I think that's indication of the Ergun, the Haganah, the offshoots, whether they were right, whether they were wrong in certain of their times and what they did. Basically, we were going to be in charge. No longer were we going to hide in fear. And we needed a state like others, and we needed an army like others, and we needed training like others, and we needed to move on.
Well said, Marilyn. I thought of two things. First, at Sipora, just a little bit of an anecdote, was talking about Hebrew language. So many of you know my uncle Chaim, and his last name happens to be brilliant, Feder. He is married to Irit, whose family name was Feder, before her father changed it to Ben Dov.
Oh, okay.
Interesting. They're not related. I mean, they are now very happily related, but you know what I mean. The second, and some of you I'm sure are familiar with this story that is a favorite of mine by Aaron Meged, The Name. And it says exactly what Marilyn described. Very succinctly, a young Israeli Sabra couple who go regularly to visit her grandfather, who spends his days frozen in time, always thinking of his grandson, Menachem Mendel, who died in the Shoah when he was 13. And he constantly talks about him to them. And it's very hard for them to listen, but they do until she becomes pregnant. They're going to have a child. And when grandfather Ziskin hears, he automatically assumes what? That they're going to name their child
Menachem Mendel.
Menachem Mendel.
Sure.
Oh, no. And this puts the grandfather Ziskin, his daughter, who will be the grandmother, and the young couple, the friction. They will not hear, you're right, the Sabra couple, of their child, Israeli, having the stench, I think that's the word he uses, of that name, which reeks of sheepishness, weakness, but they want an Israeli name, Ehud or Barak. You put the two together, it's one of our former, but of course, There was a movement, I've said this before, that it took a long time till Israel put the Shoah in its high school curriculum. It didn't know how to handle that.
Well,
It
many
couldn't
people didn't, yes.
couldn't imagine that their grandfathers, their fathers, their uncles would have been so passive. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a whole new psychology. And when you come into your own land and have to know to be defensive and at times offensive, a whole new image. Well, we talked and described these pioneers who rejected, we'll say now, Judaism. Micha asks, have all the heirs to these rebellious founders remained intent on rejecting Judaism? Now that we're in our own land, he says, no. As I said, he believes and he sees that there is a movement amongst the young secular for reconnecting with our tradition. Notice I am using specific words. We are not necessarily talking about mitzvahs. We will talk about that. Now, Micha shares an analogy that Amos Oz offered in also grappling with this issue of, isn't it possible now, time has passed, for us to reject the rejection? And think about this as I read it on a personal level, and the image is so poignant. And then be prepared to tell us what you think Oz is suggesting and Micha be the first step in the process of reconnecting. And next week, we will begin with looking at 3 types of secularists, and then the other side, and eventually understand why the divide, and as Micha says, how it can be healed. So Oz Zichrono Livracha says, if the Jewish tradition is the Jews' inheritance, the accumulated multi-generational wisdom handed down from their ancestors, Jews must ask how best to manage that inheritance. When people inherit their grandparents' property, they do not usually hoard all their possessions at home. Not every chandelier is affixed to the ceiling. Not every sofa is moved into the living room. Wise heirs to family property know to fill the living room with whatever belongs there, and to move into storage whatever does not. They choose what to place in the garden as decoration, and if they have nowhere to put a particular heirloom, they might throw it in the garbage. Ultra-Orthodox Jews are like heirs who unreflectively place everything they inherit in the middle of the house. Rebellious secular Jews are like those who would throw the whole inheritance, including priceless treasures, into the trash.
That's great. It's just great.
No,
It is.
Bracha.
Linda.
Last night, Rabbi Grover interviewed.
This is all these people do. They just listen and study all the time. Go ahead, Linda.
Well, you know, he was interviewing the Shin Shanim for Sagi and Noam. And
Yes.
it was such an outstanding interview. And two of the things that they said that really are relevant to this conversation, and it was so uplifting, I was shocked to hear both of them say that, you know, we have to understand where the Haredim are coming from. And they have a certain worldview, and it's up to us to understand them and try and appreciate why they are against certain things that we want them to do, because that isn't where they are. But it was the understanding of these young people, and that was so amazing to me. And at the same time, they were saying that, what was the other thing? How impressed they were with how affected they have been by their experience at Beth Tikva, and that they themselves are studying further.
Anybody want to respond quickly to what Linda just said? You must have had the same thought that I had.
Well, I only heard that we have to understand and respect them, but it's not always, there's the two ways.
Idiotic.
You know, there's a judgmentalness that some people have to deal with that makes them uncomfortable, and it makes it hard.
Yeah, that's where I was going also. I think it is very interesting that these young Shinshinim, and I have talked to Sagi once in a while, would have this feeling, but the automatic question is that a mutual seeking of understanding from both sides? And I think that is one of the sources of the divide, that the rebellious and the intolerant become very judgmental of each other, each one feeling that they have the truth.
Bracha, is the organization Gesher still going on? I remember my early years here going to some Gesher evenings. And that whole thing is to bridge the gap between, and we'd get a room full of seculars and one token Haredi. They didn't come out to reach out to us at all.
But I think a lot of that happened after Rabin died, where there was a very strong feeling of the need for the two communities. Well, maybe not the Haredim though, the Orthodox and secular.
But you know what? We find that in our community too. I mean, this is not happening in Israel, and the divide is getting, the chasm is getting deeper.
I'm glad you're saying this, Marlene, because I meant to tell you at the very outset. Micha believes the issues he discusses are universal. He is focusing on my hometown and this country, but definitely, go on, Marlene.
I'm just saying the chasm is getting deeper. The intolerance of the ultra-Orthodox. I'm not going to say the Orthodox, because I think that there really, I mean, when he says there's different facets of orthodoxy, there really is. I mean, you talk to a modern Orthodox, quotes, modern Orthodox Jew, and there's a lot more tolerance to the practice of conservative and Reform Judaism. But if you go into the ultra-Orthodox community, it just isn't happening. I mean, they look down your nose if you're a woman and go into one of the kosher stores in a pair of pants.
And Bracha, I think I'm not sure that Bracha, it's Merle. I just don't think that we can paint everybody with the same brush. You said at the beginning that in the Haredi community, there are so many different facets. I think that is the same in every community, in our community too, in our Masorti community. I mean, we range from left to right, our liberal to not wanting to think about or respect another opinion. And I think, unfortunately, it happens all the time. But I am going to say, and I'm sure that every other university, I'm not giving a plug, but I could say that there is at least some in the Haredi community. It might not be a large percentage, but there certainly is a growing percentage of and they're not young, they're actually mature adults with families who are studying very secular programs at Hebrew U, and I'm sure it's happening at Bar-Ilan and Tel Aviv U. I don't know, but for sure I know at Hebrew U. And they're actually out there in the real world. They're judges, they're lawyers, they're social workers, they're everything, they're everything, that we are in that sense. Now, they might come home at night to their community, but they're still taking a huge step forward by even being part of that community. They have to still interact with the opposite sex and secular Jews and da-da-da-da-da. And I think we have to really take one step forward toward diversity and tolerance. And we're not all so good at being tolerant, unfortunately, of others and other people's perspectives. We see it all the time.
From both sides, both sides.
Yeah.
And I think, Marlene, making that point about Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, I'm reminded also several years ago on a bus, you know how you're overhearing something and you're not quite sure if you should indicate that you've overheard something because you want to comment. Well, I did. I couldn't help myself because I heard someone in his, somebody who was living in Israel, but was American. I didn't know her, but she was explaining to a tourist the politics of Israel. It was a long bus ride. And at one point she said, and the Orthodox don't serve in the army. And I totally had to stop her and correct her. We know who's the most famous Orthodox soldier that you people know of.
What's his name from the Saki?
Yes. Okay. So this is what I mean by stereotyping. But I'm saying even these days you have the ultra-Orthodox who are serving. So today we have introduced what we'll be talking about, and we have to pray that we will come up with a solution to putting an end to this awful rift, even if we do understand. Yes, people have said, Linda, you have to understand that the ultra-Orthodox have 10 kids. How can they stay inside and not go outside during the corona? Or they have a different mentality about attending these funerals. You do, but it's very, very difficult. But they also have to understand it has to be mutual.
We have to learn some skills.
What it will end up being a matter of, nobody has the right to feel they have the truth. And that doesn't mean we're going to say everything is relative. No, doesn't mean that either. Anyway, as always,
Bracha,
Yes,
Shabbat shalom.
as you know, I'm a big fan of Micha Goodman.
yes.
And if anybody wants to hear him, you've done a wonderful job. But if anybody wants to hear him in person talking about his book, he was featured in the Times of Israel podcast last Sunday, and I'm sure you can find it somewhere on the net.
And most importantly, I sometimes mention that I have a class on Thursday morning. His mother-in-law is one of my students. Anyway, a lovely woman, and he's a special guy. Okay, take care.
Okay, great
Shabbat shalom.
class.